But first, I'm reading to you from a thread of an individual who posted on Twitter. No reason for you to go there. I'm reading it for you so you don't have to. But if you want to, he posts under the name Martyrmade, Martyrmade. This thread, like an Angelo Codavia piece, is being sent around because it is so incredibly on point. He's talking about you. He's talking about boomer tier Trump supporters and why you're so angry. And I think he nails it. But you decide. I don't agree with everything he says, and I very rarely do with anyone. But I do think it's a good conversation starter. Let me continue. I think I've had discussions with enough boomer tier Trump supporters who believe the 2020 election was fraudulent to extract a general theory about their perspective. It is also the perspective of most of the people at the Capitol on January 6th, and probably even Trump himself. Most believe some or all of the theories involving midnight ballots, voting machines, etc. But what you find when you talk to them is that while they'll defend these positions with information they got from Hannity or Breitbart or whatever, they're not particularly attached to them. Here are the facts, actual confirmed facts, that shape their perspectives. Number one, the FBI and others spied on the 2016 Trump campaign using evidence manufactured by the Clinton campaign. We now know that all involved knew it was fake from day one. See Brennan's July 2016 memo. These are Tea Party people, the types who give their kids a pocket constitution for their birthday and have founding fathers memes in their bios. The intel community spying on a presidential campaign using fake evidence, including forged documents, is a big deal to these people. Everyone involved lied about their involvement as long as they could. We only learned the DNC paid for the manufactured evidence because of a court order. Comey denied on TV knowing the DNC paid for it when we have emails from a year earlier proving that he knew. This was true with everyone, from CIA Director Brennan and Adam Schiff, who were on TV saying they'd seen clear evidence of collusion with Russia, while admitting under oath behind closed doors that they had not. All the way down the line. In the end, we learned that it was all fake. At first, many Trump people were worried there must be some collusion because every media and intel agency wouldn't make it up out of nothing. When it was clear that they'd made it up, people expected a reckoning and shed many illusions about their government when that didn't happen. We know as fact A, the Steele dossier was the sole evidence used to justify spying on the Trump campaign. Number two, or B, the FBI knew the Steele dossier was a DNC op. C, Steele's source told the FBI the information was unserious. And D, they did not inform the court of any of this, and they kept on spying. Trump supporters know the collusion case front and back. They went from worrying the collusion must be real to suspecting it might be fake to realizing it was a scam, and then they watched as every institution, agencies, the press, Congress, academia, gaslit them for another year. Worse, collusion was used to scare people away from working in the administration. They knew their entire lives would be investigated. Many quit because they were being bankrupted by legal fees. The Department of Justice, press, and government destroyed lives and actively subverted an elected administration. This is where people whose political identity was largely defined by a naive belief in what they learned in civics class began to see the outline of a regime that crossed all institutional boundaries because it had stepped out of the shadows to unite against an interloper. GOP propaganda still has many of them thinking in terms of partisan binaries, but a lot of Trump supporters see that the regime is not partisan. They all know that the same institutions would have taken opposite sides if it was a Tulsi Gabbard versus Jeb Bush election. It's hard to describe to people on the left who are used to thinking of government as a conspiracy, Watergate, COINTELPRO, WMD, etc., how shocking and disillusioning this was for people who encourage their sons to enlist in the Army and who hate people who don't stand for the anthem. They could have managed the shock if it only involved the government, but the behavior of the corporate press is really what radicalized them. They hate journalists more than they hate any politician or governmental official because they feel most betrayed by them. The idea that the press is driven by ratings, sensationalism, became untenable. If that were true, they'd be all over the Epstein story. The corporate press is the propaganda arm of the regime they now see in outline. Nothing anyone says will ever make them unsee that, period. This is profoundly disorienting. Many of them don't know for certain whether ballots were faked in November of 2020, but they know for absolute certain that the press, the FBI, etc., would lie to them if there was. They have every reason to believe that, and it's probably true. They always claimed the media had liberal bias. Fine, whatever. They still thought the press would admit truth if the press was cornered. Now they don't. It's a different thing to watch them invent stories whole cloth in order to destroy regular lives and spark mass violence. Time magazine told us that during the 2020 riots, there were weekly conference calls involving, among others, leaders of the protests, the local officials who refused to stop them, and media people who framed them for political effect. In Ukraine, we call that a color revolution. Throughout the summer, Democrat governors took advantage of COVID to change voting procedures. It wasn't just the mail-ins. They lowered signature matching standards, etc. After the collusion scam, the fake impeachment, Trump people expected shenanigans by now. Regarding fake impeachment, we now know that Trump's request for Ukraine to cooperate with the Department of Justice regarding Biden's money activities in Ukraine was in support of an active investigation being pursued by the FBI and the Ukraine Attorney General at the time. And so it was a completely legitimate request. Then you get the Hunter laptop scandal. Big Tech ran a full-on censorship campaign against a major newspaper to protect a political candidate. Period. Everyone knows it. All of the tech companies now admit it was a mistake, quote unquote. But the election's over, so who cares? Goes without saying, but if the New York Times had Don Jr.'s laptop, full of pics of him smoking crack and engaging in group sex, lots of lurid family drama, emails describing direct corruption and backed up by the CEO of the company they were using, the New York Times wouldn't have been banned. Think back. Stories about Trump being peed on by Russian prostitutes and blackmailed by Putin were promoted as if they were fact, and the only evidence was a document paid for by his opposition and disavowed by its very source. The New York Post was banned for reporting on true information about Hunter Biden. The reaction of Trump people to all of this was not no fair. That's how they felt about Romney's binders of women in 2012. This one is different. Now they see correctly that every institution is captured by people who will use any means to exclude them from the political process. And yet, they showed up in record numbers to vote. He got 13 million more votes than in 2016, 10 million more than Clinton got. As election night dragged on, they allowed themselves some hope. But when the four critical swing states, and only those states, went dark at midnight, they knew. Over the ensuing weeks, they got shuffled around by grifters and media scam artists, selling them conspiracy theories. They latched onto one, then another, increasingly absurd theory, as they tried to put a concrete name on something very real. Media and tech did everything to make things worse. Everything about the election was strange. The changes to procedure, unprecedented mail-in voting, the delays. But rather than admit that and make everything transparent, they banned discussion of it, even in direct messages. That's the private emails between people on Twitter. Everyone knows that. Just as Don Jr.'s laptop would have been the story of the century, if everything about the election dispute was the same, except the parties were reversed, suspicions about the outcome would have been taken very seriously. See 2016 for proof. Even the court's refusal of the case gets nowhere with them because of how the opposition embraced mass political violence. They'll say with good reason, what judge will stick his neck out for Trump knowing he'll be destroyed in the media as a violent mob burns down his house? It's a fact, according to Time magazine, that mass riots were planned in cities across the country if Trump won. Sure, they were protests, but they were planned by the same people as during the summer, and everyone knows what would have happened. Judges have families, too. Forget the ballot conspiracies. It's a fact that governors used COVID to unconstitutionally alter election procedures. The Constitution states that only legislatures can do that in order to help Biden to make up for a massive enthusiasm gap by gaming the mail-in ballot system. They knew it was unconstitutional. It's right there in plain English. But they knew the cases wouldn't see court until after the election. And what judge will toss millions of ballots because a governor broke the rules? The threat of mass riots wasn't implied, it was direct. The entrenched bureaucracy and security state subverted Trump from day one. The press is part of the operation. Election rules were changed. Big tech censors opposition. Political violence is legitimized and encouraged. Trump is banned from social media. They were led down some rabbit holes, but they are absolutely right that their government is monopolized by a regime that believes they are beneath representation and will observe no limits to keep them getting it. Trump fans should be happy he lost. It might have kept him alive. Again, you don't have to agree with every aspect of that analysis. But there are some very, very well-stated points, a synthesized assessment of much of what happened, and I think an honest, earnest, sincere attempt to understand why people are so angry. Because we believe in our hearts, we have an abiding, deep, pure belief in fairness. We don't mind losing. Oh, we don't like it. But we don't protest at the Capitol. We certainly don't burn things down the way the left does. We redouble our efforts, pick ourselves back up, and say, well, we'll come back the next time. But we know they cheated. We're certain they cheated. And eventually they'll admit it. Because just like a serial killer, once they're caught, they like to point out how they were smarter than you. If they actually get away with it forever, this is why they taunt the police, then you won't know how clever they were. You won't know the secret.